Hi everybody, thank you for joining our event today. My name is Helen Dyke. I'm an employment solicitor based in Birmingham here at Owen Mitchell, and what a week it is to be speaking to Jess Phillips. Obviously we all know about the chaos in the US. Here in the UK, we're all in national lockdown. I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions to Jess on that today. And it's all causing huge anxiety, as we know, for people and for businesses. So here at Owen Mitchell, we're taking a lot of steps to make sure that we're supporting our clients and our people. And one of the ways that we do that is through our diversity and equality groups. So my colleague Hayley Hill and I run our IMPowered group in Birmingham, and we focus on the challenges and opportunities for gender diversity and equality in the workplace. And we thought, what better way to bring people together today than to have a conversation with the wonderful Susie Branch-Haddow, who is the Director of Employer Engagement at Birmingham Metropolitan College, and Jess Phillips MP. So please do ask questions in the chat function. We really encourage lots of questions to Jess. Jess has said to us that you can ask her absolutely anything, so it should be quite an interesting session. And without further ado, I shall hand over to Susie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen, and thank you for inviting me back again. As Helen has said, I am Employer Engagement Director at BMet College, but very much a friend of Owen Mitchell and the IMPowered group, and so have been able to take part in quite a few of these sessions over the years and really enjoy the themes we explore with our female visitors, and from a personal experience always leave these sessions feeling very empowered and reminded of the power of a supportive network of women. So hopefully we will be able to do the same today, albeit in a very virtual platform. So on the positive side, of course, normally we're used to running these in a smaller group and more face-to-face. So going virtual is a bit of a new one for me, but I think in a slightly reassuring way. I'm also aware that there's close to 300 of you out there today who have joined in to hear Jess and I in conversation. So actually perhaps not being able to see such an audience helps me with my nerves a little bit this morning. But however, it's not just me talking to Jess in a conversation with the two of us. We really want to be able to take your questions. So if I could ask you to post any of those questions in the live Q&A panel. I will keep an eye on that panel as we're talking, and at various bits within the next hour that we've all got together, I'll pause our conversation and bring those questions in. And as Helen said, we would always ask our guests if there was an area they prefer us not to venture into, what their no-go zones were like, and Jess has been absolutely clear to me, ask me anything you like. So at this point, I would normally sort of go into the, I suppose, the traditional, this is your lifestyle. And to help prepare that, I'd normally go to Wikipedia, that is the gospel, of course, of truth, and start with all the various accolades, achievements, the very serious tone, the politics. But today I decided, as I really wanted to get more about getting to know Jess, I decided to nick my introduction from Jess herself and her book, Every Woman, One Woman's Truth, about speaking the truth. So to introduce Jess, you might already know me as that gobby MP who has a tendency to shout about the stuff I care about. Because I'm a woman with a cause. I have been called a feminazi witch, a murderer, and threatened with rape. The internet attracts a classy crowd. So speaking the truth isn't always easy, but I believe it's worth it. And I want you to believe it too. The truth can be empowering. The truth can lead to greater equality. And the world would be incredibly boring if we let all of those people who allegedly know everything say everything. By demanding to be heard, by dealing with our imposter syndrome, by being cheerleaders, doers, not sayers, creating our own networks, and by daring to believe that we can make a difference, We can. We're women and we're kick-ass, and that's the truth. So Jess, a really warm welcome to IMPowered. I am looking forward to kicking some ass together in this next hour. And if people don't mind, as host, I will take the sort of the host liability here and kick us off with the starting question. So, look, from that introduction, yourself on yourself, what's clear to me is that there's that drive, that absolute determination of yours for voice and truth comes shining through. So could you just give us a bit of background on that, Jess? Where does that drive and determination come from?
Well, hello everybody. For a start off, it's always funny when people read my own words back to me. I'm currently in the middle of writing another book, and the whole time you're writing it, you think, oh my God, it's absolutely awful. And then when somebody reads something out that you've written, you think, oh, maybe it's not so bad. It's very, very difficult to, I think that my obsession with telling the truth and being honest and upfront actually is something that I got very early on when in Westminster, not necessarily before. I mean, I know a lot of people, there's a huge amount of conversation about how politicians all lie and we're all the same and all that sort of jazz. But until I was actually an elected representative in Westminster, I don't think I would have become so obsessed with the idea of truth and honesty, because what I found in politics when I got there was a public who really like when people admit their faults and their failings, and if they make a mistake, they seek to undo it with honesty. And yet the system that I found was one where even if you make a grave mistake that is very clear and everybody knows you've made it, you have to pretend that you haven't made it. And I found, I don't think I was truly cognizant of that before I walked into the House of Commons. And then I just couldn't understand how people could stand and it's not necessarily just the Conservative government who have been in power since I was elected. I feel like there is this terror in public life of making a mistake and owning up to it, and yet there is a huge appetite for it in the public. And so that is where the sort of my obsession with truth, but my drive, my political drive, my drive for a cause was given to me at birth. I mean, like a religion, my family were Labour Party activists, union activists, feminist activists. I went to Women's Liberation Playgroup, which was set up in the local church hall where I come from in Birmingham by a group of women because there was no organised childcare. And they wanted to be able to go out to work, and so they made a rota system where each day one of them would be, it would definitely not pass an Ofsted inspection, is all I'm going to say. I remember vividly watching Poltergeist when I was about 3 years old, but it's made me into the woman I am today. And everybody smoked, but that was the early 1980s. But you know, so everything that I ever did as a child, or every social circle that I ever encountered, was about people mutually coming together for the advancement of a group. And when you grow up with that being your environment, I was basically taught from day one by my grandparents and my parents that if something isn't right in the world, then it's on you to try and do something about that. So my nan, who used to, because my mum had gone back to work, and when I wasn't at Women's Liberation Playgroup, my nan and my grandma raised me, and I used to basically live in their house in the constituency where I now represent, in their houses in the week, so that my mum and dad could go to work. And my nan was nearly blinded by a drug that she'd taken called Iraldin, and she had to wear big glasses. I always thought she, you know, looked really cool, but that wasn't really the intention. And she always had to wear a visor and keep the sun out of her eyes. And she had no tears. So we had to, as a child, I learned to sort of drag drag like the grit out of her eyes, and every time she blinked it was like having sandpaper on the inside of her eyes. My nan was a dinner lady in Yardley, a single mum throughout the 1950s, which is unheard of. And my mum, at the age of 24, she had 2 children, my older brothers. She successfully sued the drug company that had made this drug, that had done this to my nan's eyes. And she found hundreds of people across the country who had suffered from exactly the same affliction from taking this medication, and she sued them in like 1976 for something in the region of about £12 million that was given out to all the people across the country. And so when you grow up in a household where you're basically being raised by Erin Brockovich, you just learn that if something isn't right, and when I was at school, if something wasn't right, I would say it. I would say, I'm sorry, I don't agree with this. And I was always told to challenge authority if it was wrong, not needlessly, but if they were wrong and they had power over you from something other than that was deserved, then you shouldn't feel that you shouldn't challenge it. So that when you're raised in that environment, I didn't ever accept people telling me what to do unless there was merit in what they told me, and I've been like that all my life.
And there is so much that I could to unpick there. I think, Jess, thank you for all of that. We've started to have questions come through, but again, there's just sort of 2 things that I wanted to unpick there, and then I'll pick up on some of these questions. And if you've already submitted a question to us as before today, please be assured I've got that, and we'll make sure we feed that in. So the passion, the drive you've got for being able to speak the truth, being able to voice your opinion, and to be able to do that so boldly, has also caused you some serious challenges over the years. And I'm going to just move out of your political arena and more thinking on a personal point here. You know, I said it in the introduction, the abuse that you've had to contend with on social media has been horrifying. And I think everybody in this room will be aware of some of the level of insults and just pure, straightforward illegal abuse that you've had to cope with. I mean, how do you cope with that?
I mean, it varies. There is no one way to cope with it. And what I try and say to people who are facing a battle is that you should always expect backlash of one variety or another, because nothing ever changed in the world by people just going, do you know, this is a really good idea, and everybody else going in a sort of consensual way, oh yeah, that's not a bad idea, let's all just crack on with that. If only that were the case. There is no struggle that has ever happened that doesn't have some element of backlash. And so part of me, it's sort of a driving force when you suffer terrible abuse because of your gender, which is usually the reason in my case, or your class or your perceived class, because, you know, I've got a regional accent, so I must therefore, you know, sort of race whippets and eat Findus crispy pancakes every night for dinner. Nothing wrong with Findus crispy pancakes.
I was going to say.
Absolutely love a 3-cheese Findus crispy pancake. It's like a treat on a Friday. I go to the local pub and there's an Iceland next door to it, and we always go and get like an Iceland dinner on a Friday. You know, you will be attacked on those things when people perceive that the power is starting to be imbalanced. So the people who classically hold power, when they start to feel that it's not necessarily that they're losing any power, but that somebody else is gaining it, a different group of people are gaining it, there is inevitably a backlash. And so sometimes I cope with it by saying, well, I must be doing something right, because if people who would immediately go to making rape threats of you are the people who are attacking you, you've got some quality enemy there, and why would you ever want those people to agree with you? So sometimes I use it as fuel to keep me going. But there are some times when you don't cope with it at all, or you think you're coping with it, and You're not at all. There have been a couple of moments when I have felt like I was fine with it, and it's just part of my job, and I wish it wasn't, and I'll spend the rest of my life campaigning to make sure that it isn't part of my job, but that it is just one of those things that you have to accept, a bit like young women accept, and well, all women, but it seems very prolific for young women, accept a smattering of sexual harassment throughout their lives. We all just learn to accept the sort of reality of, if you go out in a short skirt, expect people to harass you. That sort of acceptance is similar to the one that I have to have with the abuse that I get, as it's just part of being an outspoken politician. But then there have been flashes in my life where I've thought that armour was in place, and it wasn't. So on one occasion I collapsed in a supermarket in Birmingham, the evening after, where the afternoon I'd spent watching a trial of somebody who threatened to kill me. And I would say I was watching it on a Zoom thing in this modern world. So I was in my own house listening to a judge sentencing a man who will probably never come out of prison because of the threats that he had made to me and my children. And I just sort of shut my laptop. My husband was in the kitchen. He said, "Do you want a cup of tea?" I had a cup of tea. I thought I was fine. And then later I totally had like a horrible panicked moment where I literally couldn't breathe in the supermarket. And there was another moment where my son and I had gone to a book signing for David Williams, and my son Danny, at the time he was 10, I think, and we were in this place, and there was quite a lot of security around, like people in tabards, and it was quite busy. And I kept saying to my son, "Come over here and sit down," because I know David Williams a bit. I was like, "You can sit down and talk to him." And he said, "I'm just going to stand here." And he was standing with his back to the wall. And I said to him, "Why won't you just come over and sit down?" And he just said, "Oh, I just have to be near the exit and make sure that nobody is behind me, because there's lots of people here, Mum." And I realised that years and years of having to live with security has had an effect on my 10-year-old son, and means that when he's in a room, he's hyper aware. And this is not dissimilar to working with children in refuge accommodation, that children who live with violence and threat become hyper vigilant, and it's very, very difficult for them to concentrate in certain circumstances, because they are thinking of exits and entries and what could possibly go wrong. And my son has certainly had to learn to live with some of that, and that, like, I can take it, it's fine for me, but to watch him in a place where he should be really happy and excited, to be considering where the best exit is in case somebody attacked us, is just absolutely, that is harrowing.
Do you think we get the right level of support from social media platforms?
No. I think that they've got massively better than when I first was elected, where it was just literally the Wild West and anybody could do and say anything. I will try not to swear too much, but there have been times when somebody suggested that I remember on Twitter, somebody suggested that I needed to essentially to be raped until to fix my teeth. And that I needed that to happen to me, and maybe it'd fix my teeth, which incidentally a subtweet came in from a dentist who said this is certainly not recommended by the any dental association. And I complained to Twitter about this at the time, and they respond about what I always do is I complain as a civilian. So I've got a special number I can contact, but I always go through the process like anybody would have to. So I press report, just like anybody would, because I like to test the strength of the system. And so I went through the report system, and I got a thing back saying that in a certain context that could be considered reasonable. And I just was like, what, in what context? I literally, like, I like to write books. I'm an imaginative person. I like to spin a yarn, but I just couldn't in my head come up with the context that would make that to be the case, and I laugh about it now. And then obviously I complain through the proper official channels, and that person is banned. But that's, you know, that is just one example. And the reality is that the algorithms and the internet, the way it was designed, and all those platforms were designed largely by sort of libertarian young men. I mean, Facebook was literally designed so that men on campus could compare how good looking women from different fraternities were, like hot or not. So when that is so built into the system that we now all live our lives on, it takes a huge amount to get them to understand the difference between threats, harassment and violence and freedom of speech. And, you know, there is no freedom in this country or in most countries that hold freedom of speech dear to give you freedom of speech to cause fear, alarm and harm. That doesn't, it's not within any sort of constitutional law that that's the case, and yet they rely on that so heavily.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, my heart goes out to you, because having to deal with any of that, you know, from conversation with you now, you know, I've been aware at a distance of some of those challenges, but when you really personalize that and share with us today the story of your son as well, it just, you know, it forms a lump in your throat, because you just think, I can't believe that just for having a platform and having the confidence of convictions to be able to use your voice, that people can respond in such a way. And I admire you so much for you know, battling that through and still going, because the easier option sometimes, of course, is to say, and quite understandably, to say, do you know what, this has got too far. I've got to finish with this. I'm going to move us on slightly now from social media and pick up on a couple of the questions that have come through. Look, you mentioned earlier about some of the challenges you get about speaking with a voice, and a voice in Westminster with an accent that we're all very familiar with and incredibly proud of across our region. But I've got a question here that says, to Jess Phillips, please. Thank you for saying please, very kind of you. How difficult is it in Westminster as a woman, and a woman with a regional accent?
I mean, I would be lying if I said it was really, like, you know, Westminster presented a huge amount of challenge that you wouldn't normally expect. It's, you know, everybody goes into it knowing that there's an element of rough and tumble, but there definitely are challenges that women face there that are not faced, and a lot of that is external. I think that quite a lot of politicians in Westminster and the civil servants and the people who work in Parliament, they are, whilst not exclusively, they, you know, there is much less of the direct sexism or classism from your colleagues than there used to be, but the challenges you face often come from external. So from sometimes the media, like I will be asked about my children in a way I've never once heard anyone ask about George Osborne's children or Andy Burnham's children, and they both have children younger than my children, and I will be asked, you know, the things that I wear, the clothes that I wear, the stuff that I do will be met with derision on the basis of my gender. Oh, well, it's another woman's issue, as if women aren't 50% of the population, a massive part of the economy, a huge part of our security, and so that is a real challenge that you have to constantly combat all the time. But you do, I mean, as for my accent, there are a number of different things that really irritate me about it. Is for a start off, in as far as Westminster politics is concerned, there is the north and the south. Those are the only two options. The middle is entirely identityless, and so to some people I'm a total southerner, and to some people I'm literally from Carlisle. I'm Scottish. That's how northern they think I am. And so that is a massive irritation. And you get quite a lot of people picking up some of the things that you might say that to you are completely normal and common. I hate more than anything. And I had to stop Hansard, which is like the documentation of Parliament. I had to stop them when I used the word mom, writing it as mum, because in Birmingham we say mom, and the amount of people who criticise me for this, I cannot tell you. Every single time if I write the word mom down anywhere, it is I'm told that I'm being American and this, that and the other. It's just like, no, that's just how we speak in the Midlands. That's what we say. And nobody would say it to somebody for saying ma'am in Newcastle, but we get totally pilloried for that sort of thing. But the thing that some colleagues do, they do it much less now, but when I was first there, is that if you are somebody who speaks with a regional accent, or you are perceivably from a lower social class to them, is that they will say that when you care about things, that you're shroud waving, like you're hysterical. So when you say things like, you know, there are women being murdered every week, people will be like, oh, you're shroud waving. They will also say, oh, you know, this is Westminster, it's not student politics, which is just terribly patronising, and is usually said by somebody who doesn't have an argument. Play the ball, not the man, and all that. And they do it much less with me now, but they will be doing it with other newer members of Parliament, where they will try and make out like you're just naive and you're stupid for talking about things in your constituency. And you definitely get that more if you have a regional accent. The other thing that people think if you've got a regional accent is that everything you say is passionate. I mean, a lot of the time I'm saying very, very dull things, like talking about fisheries policy, but for some reason when people hear it, and definitely black women suffer from this at all, that if black women say anything, people say, well, she's quite aggressive. And it's a bit like that. It's like everything you say is tinged with some sort of personal sense of harm, because you're saying it with the voice of the people that you're saying it for. And so people sometimes get a bit like, oh, don't you know, you don't have to get emotional just when you're just talking in your own accent. Like, and that is really, and there's nothing I can do about it. I can't speak in a different way. I can't even hear that I have an accent. So it's just really odd to me that I'm meant to sort of try and tone myself down in a way that I just don't know how to do.
I find this fascinating, and particularly around the sort of the female bit that you were describing at the beginning, because I'll move on to the next question. But I remember when I had I was on maternity leave, but I'd decided to go to a small networking dinner because I knew I was going back to work and I wanted to keep my feet in. And I remember sitting at this particular event, and it'll remain nameless, and someone saying to me, you know, how old's your little one? And I think my son was probably was about 4 or 5 months at the time. And they said, you know, how are you feeling about leaving him? You must be really struggling leaving him to come here tonight, etc. And I said, well, no. And they looked at me completely horrified, as if I'd just said, you know, I don't love my son. Yeah. And they said, aren't you? And I said, well, to be fair, he's currently with the other person in his life who I guarantee loves him just as much as I do, which is his father. And it was just amazing to watch this reaction of someone horrified that he was with the 2 words that annoy the hell out of me, daddy daycare. No, it's not daddy daycare. He's his dad. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think my husband suffered terribly from that as well. And nobody ever once said, well, do you find it hard doing a night shift? My husband was a night shift worker when I had my first baby and my second baby, in fact. And like, you know, the pull of having to leave me at night, you know, in the sort of terror of a night with a newborn baby. Nobody ever said to him, you know, is everything all right? Like, you know, it must be hard for you. And nobody ever. So, you know, it annoyed me. I went back to work when one of mine was 6 weeks old because I really, really, really wanted to. And and everybody assumed terrible emotional damage on my part, but no one ever asked how he was feeling, and that's terrible, because I think there must be a wrench for dads as well, but they never ever get to say it or talk about it or have any feelings about it. We have 1950s social policy in the 21st century.
Yeah, it's shocking. Sometimes my son's nursery call me up. I think it's really good you're calling me, but my husband does most of the childcare during the week, so I'm kind of the wrong person to be calling. And you asked for that number to swap.
Yeah. I asked for that number to swap for weeks and months, and only now do they actually call my husband. And I remember once being at parents' evening, sitting there, and they were saying, oh, you know, they were asking me, like, does he like fish or does he like that? And I was just like, I don't know, does he like fish? To my husband, like, ask it.
Sort of staying on the theme of youngsters, I suppose, and particularly at the beginning, you were giving that background to us about, you know, your own family's influence on you when you were younger. So I've got two questions, I think, that have come through from Jane. So Jane says, P.S. I met Jess some 12 months ago at her book launch. Well done, Jane. You've got a brownie point there. The message, as long as you bought the book, the message she wrote to my then 12-year-old daughter is pinned by my daughter's desk and is more relevant now than ever. You can take over the world and make it better, Imogen. Fight the power, Jess. So just to show how much you are stretching across the generations, as you probably know. But Jane has a second question that she wanted me to ask you, which is, I like this one a lot. Can you pinpoint the most eye-rolling moment for you in the last 8 months?
Oh gosh, there's been so many eye-rolling moments in the last 8 months. My eyes are literally in the back. I think that I've got to say the Dominic Cummings incidents, and it's not necessarily all the bits that everybody else, you know, that all the obvious eye-rolling things that happened, like, you know, literally set eyes rolling at the idea of an eye test being done in a car. But my favourite moment, actually, the thing that made my eyes roll the most about Dominic Cummings' press conference, A, why did he have to have like a weird press conference in a garden anyway, but B, was that when he was trying to justify the house he'd been staying in up north by Barnard Castle, he said, he sort of was like, oh, you know, it's not much, it's just like a concrete building. And I was just like most people's houses, like, just like, I felt like, what did he just say? My husband was a lift engineer in the tower blocks in Birmingham, and he was like, mate, you just totally insulted. Most people have concrete blocks in their houses. Like, where do you live in, like a gold built house? Like, what is that? So that was a relatively eye rolling moment in a whole week of some serious eye rolling. But the thing that bothers me the most about how the government have handled the coronavirus crisis is that they think that saying things and doing things are the same thing. And they're not the same thing. They think if they come out and say, it's all going to be fine, we're going to do this, that's the same as governing with detail and planning. And so often they'll stand up and say, gosh, we're going to do this, that and the other, and then nothing happens on the ground. So PPE was completely missing in my constituency in the first 6 weeks of the crisis. And yet I was being told every day that it was there. And I'm like, well, then care workers are lying to me. Somebody is lying here. And I'm going to say, I believe the people who I can see are struggling. And so that has been incredibly eye-rolling. But the also from a gender point of view, the fact that they basically have all the way through the crisis forgotten that women existed. So women's maternity leave wasn't taken into account during the furlough, whether you'd qualify for furlough. So if you were on maternity leave, you might not have qualified, which we had to have changed in the first few weeks. That same problem still exists with people who are self-employed. Maternity leave is considered by the government to be a holiday. They clearly have never taken any maternity leave. I'd literally rather be at work. And so that is just like, oh, dude, do you want to just, it's like taking the piss now how many times you're going to forget that women exist in this every single single time you put out a thing. But the most eye-rolling, as somebody, you probably can't see it, who has her nails done every 2 weeks. I nearly flew to Spain at one point because I couldn't have my nails done, but I could get on a plane to Spain. I thought, I'm going to fly to Spain for the day and have my nails done. Is that men could have their beards done, which is right on their face, where they could be sneezing all over the person doing it, but we weren't allowed to go and have our nails done. We're putting our hands through a screen. And it was just that, like, just remember that we exist. Just once, when you make a new policy or a new process, just once think there are some women in the world.
I couldn't agree with you more. And on the maternity level, I think I'd be wanting to do my own. Well, I'd like the holiday refund, to be honest, if a maternity leave is meant to be a holiday. I'm going to move on now to more of your political career. We've got quite a few questions coming through on that. And on that gospel that is Wikipedia, I think it says that one of your childhood ambitions was to one day become Prime Minister. So sort of staying on that theme, we've got a question here. Hi Jess, huge fan and avidly following your home renovation on Instagram. I understand why you stepped down in your running for party leader this time. However, do you think you will run again in the future? Brackets, I hope so.
That's kind. The honest answer is I can't answer that question. I don't know the answer. I don't know. The reason that I decided to run was because I felt that the Labour Party was in stasis, and that the people who were currently within it at the time was not a broad enough coalition for that stasis to be broken. And I thought that if I ran, that lots of people would want to join the Labour Party, potentially because I have an appeal way beyond my party politics, and people write to me all the time from the Tory party, Lib Dems, from people who say, oh, I would never agree with you, I probably would never vote for you, but I like that you say what you think. And I wanted to use that appeal to make the Labour Party a broader spectrum of people, so that maybe we could get out of the rut that we had been in, which felt like a sort of vice at times. And so that's why I decided to do it, and I was the best person to do that at the time. We would have to wait and see what the future looks like. I very much hope that Keir Starmer doesn't have to stand down in 5 years, because that would mean we would have won an election, which is obviously the single most important thing. But if he did, I would have to assess whether I was the right person at the time to make a positive impact on the party and the country. But I wouldn't rule it out.
And I think it was the Saturday Times, one of the quotes I saw from them on yourself was, there's nobody else at Westminster quite like Jess Phillips. She's fearless and funny, riotous and rebellious, maverick and mischievous. And we could probably do with that personality shining through even more.
I mean, we definitely need more people who are a bit of a laugh, and are people feel connected with, who aren't massive racists. Because that whole sort of political genre of being authentic and being a laugh and has been very, very, very overtaken. That sort of populist idea has been very, very, very overtaken by the very, very hard right wing. And look at Donald Trump. And there's some reason why people liked Donald Trump, and we shouldn't be snippy about that. There's some reason why people like Boris Johnson. There's some reason why people like Nigel Farage. And so we have to take some of the things that they like about the feeling like people are telling the truth, even if they're not, but feeling like those people have your back, but not use that to divide and conquer, but use that to unite and serve. So there is an element where I think that there needs to not just be sort of competent governance, there needs to be a level of heart linking with the public.
I'm going to move us back over, because of this, so I've got about 3 questions in a row here back onto the current pandemic. I mean, my opening question from myself is, you've mentioned you've got 2 sons. We've had lockdown. How's that gone for you?
I'm not a teacher. That's been made crushingly obvious to me. I have to say, I mean, notwithstanding how awful it has been for lots and lots of people, for me, I get to be at home much more, and that has been a real pleasure. And I worry about when I have to go back to sort of normal service resuming and not being here half the week, because it takes quite a lot of time to get your kids into that routine, and they're totally out of it now. And so I think it will be quite a lot of emotional labour when it goes back for all of us. But yeah, I mean, mostly my children are now 15, nearly 16, and 12. And so they can make their own dinner and make their own tea, and they make me cups of tea and things. And so I haven't had any of the hardships that people who had really little ones, but I have zero ability to motivate them to do anything at all to do with school. I mean, we watched Countdown on the first day, and I thought, this is about as much education as I'm going to be able to provide throughout the whole thing. We are very good at Countdown now, though. We've got very good at quiz shows. But it's really hard, isn't it? I don't know. I mean, I don't understand the maths that they do. They don't carry the 1 when they add up. I'm literally lost at the most basic level because they learn differently. I bought the GCSE texts to read, although I'd read them all before. But I bought them to read, and I literally just started to hit my head up against a brick wall trying to get my kids to care about it. But
I think one of the things lockdown's done for a lot of key workers and careers has perhaps made people value, and I know there's quite a lot of people in the audience today who are from universities, schools, colleges across the region, and probably an understanding of the value and the skill and the contribution that teachers and educationalists bring. And of course, I'd be slightly biased because of the business that I work for, but I think that is what another positive we can deem out of this crisis.
Teachers who have been, you get pilloried all the time for some unknown reason. People seem to hate teachers. I think it's because they're jealous of the 6 weeks holiday, as if those people are all on holiday for that entire period. But yeah, just like, what a massive skill. I'm like, we just went over this. Why don't you know it yet? I'm like, we just literally did this. I can't believe you can't remember. And I just have no patience for it at all. Whereas with other people's children, I could be patient all day, actually. But with my own, I just think, you're doing this on purpose. You're doing this to harm me.
Well, we've got a question here, sort of coming back on the theme of women and the pandemic. So it's well documented that women have suffered more stress and mental illness through the coronavirus pandemic. What, if anything, can the government do to mitigate this?
I mean, the truth of the matter is that mental health services at every single level of crisis were not in place before the pandemic, and the idea that they are currently in place while there has been this enormous surge of people suffering from anxiety, depression, and other mental health disorders is just for the absolute birds. The government needs to have a genuine and proper funding strategy to have a level of parity of esteem between mental health and physical health, because, you know, I know that if I break my arm, I will get it fixed and that will cost my family nothing. Whereas, you know, when we have been broken with emotion and hurt with mental health problems, well, we're still waiting years and years on for anyone, for any sort of service to be in place. And if that's me and I have all the social capital that I have, the only way to get really decent access, not really decent mental health, but really decent mental health services are widely available, but accessing them is nigh on impossible. The only way to do it really these days is if you've got the money to pay for it. And so we need a much, much better strategy for universal services where we are in our workplaces, in our schools, wherever we are, there needs to be an element, a universal element of, you know, early intervention, mental health support, that sort of thing. And we're just nowhere near it. We're just nowhere near it.
How do you think we're coping as society to be more open about talking about it? Is it?
I think we're much better, but still a long way to go, because actually I think individuals feel better talking about some mental health problems. That lessens, in my experience, when it goes beyond what lots of people might suffer, like people might have bouts of depression, like people might have bouts of anxiety. There was certainly quite a lot of good work done in certain areas of specific mental health problems, such as substance misuse, self-harm, those sorts of not substance misuse, sorry, eating disorders and self-harm. There is a lot more conversation around that for young people, and about how that is the byproduct of poor mental health, and that would need addressing. But for me, for very clinically vulnerable and unwell people, there is still a huge amount of stigma. So often when we're talking about, you know, being mental health aware, we're not talking about people who are suffering violent psychosis, or we're not talking about people who are very heavily dependent on substance misuse as a coping mechanism for deep-seated trauma. You don't see on the nice adverts telling everybody to talk, you don't see a heroin addicted, sexually exploited woman selling herself to prostitution. And those are the people that I see, and it doesn't feel like there's been particularly a softening of the approach for those people. And as somebody who I grew up with terrible and destructive substance misuse in my family, and I still don't know that in fact I'm certain that it wouldn't happen, that if my son was suffering with really severe substance misuse, that I would feel the same comfort talking about that with my colleagues or seeking help for that as I would with if he had cancer. I'd put that on Twitter. And so I think we still have a hugely long way to go, and I really worry that as policymakers we rely too much on the idea that there is really, you know, that things have got better. And that we're all mental health aware, and it lets people off the hook for funding the services terribly. You know, when you get the sort of speeches about how we must care and we must destigmatise mental health, that does absolutely nothing for people suffering from it if there isn't somewhere to help them. So we essentially open an enormous door to an empty room, and that I worry desperately that policymakers feeling more comfortable about talking about mental health, that they're less comfortable talking about people who might have ended up in prison because of their mental health, for example. They're much less comfortable talking about that, but they're too comfortable talking about how great awareness is now without marrying that with service.
Yeah, I agree. We seem to have this. It's great that we're making a movement to be able to talk about mental health generally, but as you say, there's still a road off that roundabout we seem to not be going down. Greater society. Earlier on, you right at the beginning, actually, I think you mentioned about being in about America. So and your Twitter comment made me laugh that I think you sort of missed the final announcement because you were doing your ironing.
I never iron ever. And I just happened to iron for the first time in a decade, and I'd been watching the screen. I've been watching CNN for a solid 5 days. I hadn't looked away, and at the moment I thought I've got to take a break and get some like sun on my skin and do some jobs. They announced Biden the winner. Gutted.
And how do you feel that the appointment of a black female vice president is going to move American politics on?
I mean, it will massively move it for some quarters. It will send a huge and brilliant message to lots of people who need to see that, largely young women of colour, and all women, in fact. The idea that she could make it, and she was only elected to the Senate like 5 years ago as well. Kamala Harris, she deserves some serious props. But I think that for lots it will be, you've got to remember that Trump followed Obama, and that isn't accidental. That there, and like I say, when you make progress, there is always a backlash. There is always, if you take 2 steps forward, expect to take 1 step back at some point, because there is always a backlash. And so for lots of America, I imagine she's got her work cut out for her. And I think she can do it, and I think she will be brilliant. But it's enough that she doesn't have to do anything now, as far as I'm sure she'll be absolutely brilliant. But just her existence in that position for loads of people in America will, just like the day when Obama was elected, it will mean something so defining for them that it can only be a good thing, but it will inevitably lead to some terrible backlash.
We're down to our last 10 minutes, which I can't quite believe, and I'm still smirking to myself that in preparation for today I drafted a good 12 questions to make sure we kept conversation flowing. And what I will say is our Q&A box is quite full, but there's a couple of themes that I'm going to pull out for us on some of these questions, and one of the themes is very much on advice. So we need you to be our agony aunt. And let me just, where have we got? There's a couple here. Hello to whoever this is. Can I ask what's your best confidence or resilience building advice?
It's funny because I've always been a really confident person, and I had 3 older brothers, and I was raised by people who told me that there was nothing they could do that I couldn't do, and they sort of created sort of a monster in that regard. So I very rarely struggle with my confidence. I usually struggle after the event, like adrenaline will drive me through, and then afterwards I will worry about the things that I've said and done or how it's gone. But beforehand, I rarely feel nervous or anxious about things. But there are a number of different, I mean, it takes a huge amount to dig deep and say something, and I find it hard. I don't want people to think that I don't find it difficult to like think, God, I'm going to say the unsayable thing now that everybody actually is thinking but nobody is saying. It is incredibly hard, and I find that the only way you can do that is to know you have allies in the room. And that most of my confidence comes from a crowd, whether that's on Twitter, whether that's with in meetings that I am in. If I know beforehand that somebody has got my back in that room, I will feel much more confident than I would if I was completely like on my own. And so I think that building up a network of people and resilience in wherever you need to have confidence is vitally important. But there is also an element where there is an element in my life where I take 5 minutes. It's one of the best things about going on the television is that you go into makeup. You go into makeup beforehand, and it is literally just 5 minutes of total peace and calm. They're the best gossips as well. If you ever want celebrity gossips, the makeup women will tell you anything. But there is an element of putting on a different face as well that I find to be a confidence trick that I can use. And I always thought it was literally like putting on red lipstick and putting on the face of the person who is expected in front of this group of people or this camera. But actually, I think it is the time that you spend doing it that is the thing that is therapeutic. Is the time, because you'll be reading notes, you'll be frantic about doing something, and then you take 5 minutes and don't do anything. And I find that makes me feel relaxed and tall in a way that nothing else does. And it's funny because I was raised, like I say, by radical feminists. I've got 3 older brothers. I only ever wore boys' clothes, and I've become immensely much girlier since I was a public figure. Like, I have my nails done, I get my hair done regularly, I wear loads more makeup, I read stuff about skincare. I mean, my mum, God rest her, would not. She was literally like, wash your face with soap. But there is an element of that sort of self-care ritual that is deeply important. If you have a stressful life and you're frightened of things, that there is an element that really, it's not frippery for me to care about my nails. It keeps me going. It's a thing in my week that is just a moment where I don't think about anything else and I don't answer my phone. And so that, I think that there's a huge amount to be said about that sort of self-care.
I think self-care, and particularly, I think self-care is always incredibly important, but the times we've been going through over the past few months, self-care for all of us, I think, has become something I suppose we've tried to focus on, but probably we're all battling with in different ways as well. I mean, one of my own self-care things that I desperately try to do, and don't do it all the time, is to have I call it a tech detox. So on a Friday, I desperately try to just shut everything down. I've got an old-fashioned landline. So, and the people who need that number have got that number, and just to try and get my own self-care is that headspace sometimes. And we're staying on you as an agony aunt, if that's okay. So we've got a message here from Nicola. My daughter teaches 11-year-olds at school in your, God, I can't pronounce today, in your constituency, Blakenhall. The year before they moved to the big school, what advice would you give to young girls about to be making their way into the world?
I, funnily enough, write a letter to all the Year 11 students, the students who are going to go up into Year 7, and the Year 11 students every year in every primary school in my constituency. And I started doing that in the year that I was elected, that my own son went from Year 6 to, and I remembered how, like, I felt like I wanted to be in the fetal position for the whole week leading up to it. And I thought it'd be nice to send a letter to the kids as they were leaving their primary school to say that it will be all right, that you'll be all right, because I had felt like things weren't going to be all right, because my son has various special educational needs, and him going into the big school was just terrifying. And I thought it'd be nice for their parents as well, because those sorts of transitions in life are terrifying. My advice to young girls is, it would be the same to boys as well, but girls, I think, need to hear it much more, is sort of, don't try and replicate somebody else. There is a huge amount of, and you get a lot of it in sort of mentoring and things. Lots of people ask me to be their mentor, and I think I will help you, and I will help you make connections that you need to make. But you shouldn't try to be like me. You should be who you are. And I find that young women really try and replicate some ideal sense of the person they're going to be in the future, and obsess about it. And whether that's about the way they look, about the way that they think, about what they want to be when they grow up. And I really wish there was much less comparing to other people. The comparison to other people it's like drinking poison, in my opinion, of young people. I learned this from my husband, because I compare myself to people all the time. And my husband, who is like weirdly emotionless about this sort of stuff, he just said, well, what's the point? What are you gaining from this? And I just thought, God, he's got a point. What can I possibly gain from this? And I see it in young women all the time, that they think they have to be a certain thing. They think they have to lose their virginity at a certain point. They think that they have to dress a certain way. They think that they have to like certain things that they might not like. And I've seen it have terrible and disastrous consequences, like dangerous consequences in the lives of young people, that they feel that they have to replicate some ideal. And just try and encourage people that they don't have to be the best, that being good enough is good enough. And it's sort of a terribly brummy thing to think. I was thinking if Birmingham had a tagline, it'd be like, "Come if you want." I mean, if you're passing. But I genuinely think that level of resilience of people in Birmingham is why we don't care whether people think we're stupid or not, is because we sort of don't take things too seriously or take ourselves too seriously. Like, good enough is damn brilliant, in my opinion. Be a good enough mom. Don't try and be the best mom in the world. Be a good enough mom. Be good enough at your job that you're doing it. Be good enough at school that you're getting through. Don't worry about trying to reach some goal that you've created for yourself. And because I just think that, like, people need to be a bit more brummy, like, it'll be all right. Like, that should be like the greatest sentiment in the world. It'll be all right.
Jess, we've reached the end of our time together. I apologise to the questions have been coming through. We would never have got through them all, but I'll speak to the team at Owen Mitchell to see what we could do with these questions and whether we could share them with Jess offline for her feedback. But I think a brilliant ending to our session today. Be more brummy. That's what I'm going to take away. And I do remember somebody once saying to me when I was talking about a step up for me, and I said to this person, "God, I don't know whether I can do it. I don't know whether I can wear their shoes." And this person, who was also a bloke, looking at me, going, well, "What on earth are you wearing somebody else's shoes for? Wear your own." That's really good advice.
Be Cinderella. Wear the shoe that fits you.
Look, I've thoroughly enjoyed today. I hope you 300 odd strong audience out there have enjoyed our conversation with Jess. As I say, I'm sorry we didn't get through all the questions, but we will have a look at those and see how we can signpost back for you. So I will now hand back over to the Owen Mitchell team.
Thanks, Susie. Thanks, Jess. It just leaves me on behalf of Owen Mitchell to thank Jess and Susie for a really interesting, brilliant, funny, thought-provoking conversation. Hopefully this has been something a little bit different for you. It's offered a bit of positivity and a bit of light. Please do complete the feedback survey in the Q&A box. That really helps us to plan future events for you. We're here to help. Owen Mitchell is here to support you in your business through these really difficult times. Please do have a look at our website for support on all sorts of things like equality, COVID, Brexit and beyond that, and do get in touch and let us know if we can help. Thank you very much for joining us today and have a brilliant afternoon.